All right, so Ben Shapiro, the intellectual giant of the right, is back at it again with the hot takes. This one is specifically about climate change, where he is essentially going to downplay the ongoing inevitable consequences of our inaction on climate change, and I guess sort of give his own version of a potential set of solutions. So let's go ahead and jump into this clip here.
Can I point out that there are a lot of headlines right now about how hot it is outside? I know. It's hot outside. You know what I can do about that? Zero things. Thank God we have this thing called air conditioning. It's awesome. You know, it's a great cure for being super duper hot outside. Being a first world country. Amazing. It works out tremendously well because it turns out that if you have a really solid energy grid and you have the capacity to turn on that AC, you're living quite comfortably these days. You know what sucks? Global poverty. You know what brings global poverty? Decarbonization. Let me also point out that the media always do this routine when it's very, very hot outside. They never, ever cover it when it's cold. So it's funny. The media will say, well, you know, it's not global warming, it's now climate change. And the reason they changed the term from global warming to climate change is because the climate, in many cases, is colder during the winters than it was before. So it's hotter during the summers and it's colder during the winters. They've called this climate weirding. But that doesn't really seem to go over all that way. So now they call it climate change, which, of course, is an incredibly vague term because the climate is always changing. However, it is worth noting at this point that all of this, folks, millions will die of the heat waves that are occurring on planet. Oh my God, the ocean is so hot during the summer in Florida. Okay, so first of all, it is hot this summer in Florida. Also, it's hot like every summer in Florida. You've been to Florida? It's really, really hot and humid. Like, I noticed when I first visited here several years ago, and we moved anyway because air conditioning exists.
Okay. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? I mean, it honestly is just genuinely amazing to me that there are a lot of people in this country who are fans of this guy who think that he has something of value to add to like an intellectual debate on climate change. And he's literally just sitting here being like, well, what about air conditioning, right? I mean, not even talking about any of the data. He doesn't bring up any lick of data at all. No studies, no research, no the science that is actually backing up what he's saying here. He's just like, you know what? We live in the United States of America. We're the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Most people in this country have access to AC. So fuck it, let it rip. I guess all of the poor people can die. We will be comfortable here in our AC conditioned or our air conditioned homes in the US. I mean, it's genuinely amazing, right? Now, first off, what he was talking about there at the end, right? Obviously, there's a lot of different things we could get into. What he was referencing there in terms of the warm ocean temperatures, this isn't just like, oh, it's a normal summer cycle, right? Because he was describing, oh, it's getting colder in the winter, it's getting warmer in the summer, and he gave that weird little spiel about how we changed the term that is commonly used to refer to this phenomenon from global warming to climate change. I mean, there's a lot of dispute in terms of like why that ended up happening, but regardless, it is true that the world is heating up on average over time, right? That would be a global warming if you want to call it that, but it's also climate change in the sense that, yes, basically what the result of this gradually warming planet is that you're going to have more polarization, you're going to have more extremes, you're going to have more disruption to the common, flows around the planet that usually dictate how the climate is actually going to work out. So yeah, you are going to have colder winters, more extreme snowstorms, and I'm not exactly sure what he meant when he said the media doesn't cover it when it's cold out, because yes, they do whenever there's a massive snowstorm. Remember when I think it was either in Texas or something where they had a massive storm and then their power went out, with their electric grid and all of that. So it definitely does get covered by the media. Not sure why he's talking about that, but yeah, it's definitely the common consensus that this is going to make things more extreme on either end of the spectrum, whether it's heating, whether it's warm or cooling. That is just like standard understanding. But again, what he's referencing there in terms of the ocean temperatures, this is record-breaking shit, right? This is not just, oh, it's part of the warm cycle for this summer and Florida, it's always hot, it's always been hot. No, we're talking about record-breaking temperatures here, right? And I could show you so many other examples from around the country of just, more extreme weather events that we have been seeing that are going to become more frequent, that are going to become more intense and severe as climate change continues to worsen. I mean, we had some massive flooding that was going up over in the Northeast. We've had Phoenix that has had above 110 degrees temperature for 3 weeks in a row. I mean, just absolutely bonkers shit here. And of course, we have the scientific consensus that is predictably saying that this is largely to do with climate change. Not that any given day is specifically hotter, because of this fossil fuel usage or whatever the case. But the trend, okay, the trend is showing something very clear, that again, we are heading for hotter summers, colder winters, more intense and frequent storms, and all of that stuff. So this is obviously being heavily weighted and heavily impacted by climate change. And another important point here that he doesn't talk about at all, which kind of plays into his, we're a first world country, and so fuck the rest of the world that doesn't have air conditioning. I mean, keep in mind, we're talking about probably hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people across the world that do not have regular access to air conditioning or reliable access to a stable energy grid, as he was just bringing up there. And believe it or not, those people aren't just going to sit around and die or sit around and take it. I mean, overwhelmingly, the brunt of the impacts of climate change are going to be felt by the poorest communities around the world, and also the poorest communities within the United States. It applies at a domestic scale, same as it applies at a international scale. And so they are going to be the people who are most impacted by this. And what do you think is going to happen as this continues to get worse, as massive swaths of the planet where millions, tens of millions of people live become uninhabitable? Okay, we're going to see more, frequent migration, more, a higher amount of migration coming up to, for example, the United States southern border or other, locations around the world. I mean, people are inevitably going to have to migrate away from these unlivable places. Which again is super ironic, because you would think these people like Ben Shapiro or other people on the right who are super against immigration or, illegal immigration through the southern border or wherever the case may be, that they would maybe think about those kinds of things or consider those in their calculus. But no, they're basically, again, just like, fuck those people. They just have to sort it out for themselves, which is, on top of the irony of their immigration stance, it's also ironic because it's like, the wealthiest countries around the planet, whether it's the United States, whether it's China, whether it's the European Union, all of these different entities, they are the ones who are driving the vast majority of the impacts of climate change, and we are going to feel it much less than a lot of these other countries around the world, because we do have the financial resources, the military resources to be able to handle ourselves as this gets worse and worse. So I mean, it's just ironic for so many different reasons. But of course, I mean, he just he makes this entire conversation about what's immediately in front of your face, as if people do not have the capacity to actually think about things in the grand scale of things, right? And something else that really bothers me about this kind of commentary is when him and Jordan Peterson says this a lot as well, is he'll say the climate is always changing, and if you look at a scale of millions of years or even hundreds of thousands of years, look at all of these massive temperature fluctuations around the world, and it's yeah, those times were not times where we had a massive global civilization, right, where our supply chains are incredibly balanced and interdependent on every different stage of that supply chain around the world, with dozens of countries involved in every single step of the process. When we say things like this is going to have civilizational effects, right, we're not talking about in an instant everybody is going to die one day, or that everybody's going to boil up in the Florida ocean waters or something like that. It's no, we're talking about a breakdown of civilized society around the world, as again, diseases become more frequent and go to different places that they otherwise wouldn't have been, as places become unlivable, and you have millions of people who are going to have to migrate, as huge portions of the world are going to be destroyed by frequent storms, whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. Wildfires, that's another large one. So I mean, it's all of these things that are going to inevitably come to bite us in the ass one way or another, right? But he just wants to keep up this shtick of just basically pretending as if climate change isn't something we should really think about. Now, of course, I got to remind you guys of this famous Ben Shapiro clip where basically he was talking about what people should do as ocean temperatures continue to rise. And this was his response. I mean, again, this is the guy who we are now looking at for advice in terms of how to address climate change, right? So let's hear his advice here.
That all of the water levels around the world rise by let's say 5 feet over the next 100 years, say 10 feet by the next 100 years, and it puts all the low-lying areas on the coast underwater, right? Which, let's say all of that happens. You think that people aren't going to just sell their homes and move? It's not like human beings have
just one small problem. Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Okay, So, I mean, obviously the common, meme there by H Bomber guy, but he's correct because, I mean, this is literally, again, this is who people are listening to for advice on how to address climate change. The guy who said, as ocean temperatures rise, people on the low-lying coastal areas should simply sell their homes. I mean, it's not the best analysis, right? You would think that these guys would be able to go a little bit deeper than that. But, of course, we also have to mention the fact that the Daily Wire, the organization that Ben Shapiro is sort of the face of, and that he was there sort of since the beginning. You know who else was there at the beginning of the Daily Wire was some fracking billionaires who put millions and millions of dollars into the Daily Wire to basically pump out pro-fossil fuel propaganda for them. So, I mean, yeah, it's a mystery as to why Ben Shapiro and other people on the Daily Wire network would be spewing out this kind of distracting nonsense. Now, again, just to hammer home that point as well, climate change is obviously, in my opinion, I've mentioned this before, probably the single greatest threat facing human civilization right now. But of course, while he's simultaneously downplaying it whenever he does talk about it, when he's not talking about this extremely important issue, he's talking about shit like this. I kid you not, this is real. I had to double check it for myself, but Ben Shapiro literally did release a video just yesterday that is 43 minutes long. And the title is Ben Shapiro Destroys Barbie for 43 minutes. This man, okay, this man-child over here, went and saw the Barbie movie and then did a 43-minute review where he's attacking it as being too woke or whatever, right? I mean, could you imagine somebody on the left, pick any of your favorite leftist YouTube creators, right? Kyle Kalinske or me or someone else who actually puts out like substantive content on a regular basis, right? Imagine us doing something like this. I mean, this is how they distract their viewers with just nonsense culture war bullshit so that they aren't talking about issues that actually matter, whether it's on climate change or whether it's on, healthcare affordability, whether it's on education affordability or student debt, whether it's on any of these actual issues that will materially improve people's lives. This is what they focus on, okay? Because they want to defend the status quo. They want to defend the fossil fuel, the fracking millionaire and billionaire class, right? That's their entire project's agenda. And we also had some gems that I just had to mention here from Fox News. So shout out to Jesse Waters, who is apparently going to be taking over the primetime slot, as Tucker Carlson was obviously dipping out in the wake of that lawsuit that Fox News was having to pay out millions and millions and millions of dollars for. But this is just an example in terms of like what people are watching on this network. I mean, keep in mind, I know the ratings have been shifting recently, but this was for a long time, and I think it still is the single most watched cable news outlet in the entire United States of America. And I mean, you literally have here in Death Valley, right? The temperature was getting up into the 130s, right? 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Not livable, not sustainable for human life or anything like that. And down here, they have a Chiron. Liberals blame global warming for heat wave. And it's like, yeah, of course we had heat waves in the past, but this is on some entirely new shit, right? Again, it's not as if like when we have this conversation that like climate change specifically caused X hurricane to happen. No, but it's a tendency, it's a trajectory. It is what the data is actually showing in terms of the severity of these kinds of issues, including heat waves. I mean, it's just completely anti-science. It's not surprising, but then literally in the same night, apparently, Jesse Waters also ran this, which is, incredibly ironic. We don't know much about science. So I don't know if this was on like COVID or some other type of thing that he was talking about on his channel, but we don't know much about science. Well, maybe you don't know much about science. I mean, I'm not a climate scientist, right? I'm not a doctor. I don't know, the ins and outs of these specific fields, but I know how to actually read what the data is saying, right? I know how to listen to people who've spent their lives doing these kinds of things. And it's not just, allowing authoritative voices to be 100%, as if it's like some sort of a doctrine or something, but no. This is what the current scientific information that we have at our disposal as a civilization, as a species, right? The top minds that are working on this, the top scientists in the world that are working on this are constantly checking each other. And the data just bears out that this is a real phenomenon, that it is being caused by humans, and that we are not doing nearly enough in order to try to mitigate some of the most consequential damages that are going to come in the near future, and that we are honestly already seeing at this point. I mean, again, the recent flooding, the recent wildfires, I mean, it's piling up. There have been like multiple different instances just during this summer where I'm in Washington, D.C., and we're getting like severe, record-setting smoke advisories because of Canadian wildfires. I mean, this shit didn't used to happen with this kind of regularity. I mean, everything is completely off the charts. We went through that, that deep article that was getting into how a lot of these global currents are changing and how a lot of these global tendencies and the frequency for these kinds of things is changing over time in one of my recent videos on climate change. But it's like, this shit is just irrefutable at this point, and all these motherfuckers are doing is playing a game, and probably playing one of the most dangerous games you could possibly imagine, as it just so happens that the planet itself and global human civilization is kind of on the table right now.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying